Imagine standing alone on a frozen mountainside, surrounded by endless snow and complete silence. The temperature has dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, 9 experienced hikers slash open their tent from the inside and run into the darkness. Weeks later, every one of them is found dead. More than 60 years later, despite official investigations and modern scientific research, one question still remains. What really happened at Dyatlov Pass? It was the winter of 1959, during the height of the Cold War. Deep within the Soviet Union, the northern Ural Mountains stretched across hundreds of miles of untouched wilderness. Temperatures regularly plunged below freezing. Fierce winds swept across the open slopes, and a single mistake could mean the difference between survival and death. Yet, for a group of young adventurers, this unforgiving landscape represented the ultimate challenge. On January 23, 1959, 10 members of the Ural Polytechnical Institute left the city of Sverdlovsk for what was supposed to be a routine winter expedition. Their destination was Mount Otorten, a remote peak that required days of skiing through dense forests, frozen rivers, and isolated mountain passes. The journey was officially classified as a Category 3 expedition, the highest level of hiking difficulty recognized in the Soviet Union. These weren't inexperienced travelers. Most of the group were engineering students or recent graduates who had already completed demanding winter expeditions. They knew how to navigate blizzards, survive freezing temperatures, and travel for days through deep snow carrying heavy equipment. Leading the expedition was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a skilled and respected hiker known for his careful planning. Traveling alongside him were Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, Georgy Krivonischenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Yuri Yudin. None of them had any reason to believe this journey would become one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. As the group traveled north by train and truck, they documented their adventure with cameras and journals. The surviving photographs show smiling faces, playful moments, and confident young explorers preparing for another demanding expedition. Nothing in those images hinted at fear. Nothing suggested that only one member of the group would ever return home alive. On January 27th, the expedition officially began. For days, the hikers skied across endless fields of snow, pulling heavy supplies through one of the harshest environments on Earth. Each mile demanded endurance, discipline, and teamwork. The further they traveled, the farther they moved from civilization. There would be no rescue stations, no radio contact, and no easy way back. Then, something unexpected happened. Yuri Yudin began suffering from severe joint pain and worsening illness. Realizing he could no longer continue, he made the difficult decision to turn back. At the time, it felt like a heartbreaking failure. In reality, it unknowingly saved his life. Yudin watched his friends disappear into the white wilderness, expecting to meet them again in just a few weeks. Before parting, they exchanged smiles, handshakes, and one final photograph. It would become the last known image of the group alive. As the remaining 9 hikers pushed deeper into the northern Ural Mountains, winter conditions grew increasingly unforgiving. Heavy snowfall reduced visibility, while powerful winds erased fresh tracks almost as quickly as they were made. Then, on February 1st, 1959, after drifting off their intended route, the group reached the slope of a mountain known by the local Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl, often translated as Dead Mountain. Instead of descending into the nearby forest for protection, they pitched their tent on the exposed mountainside. To experienced mountaineers, it may have seemed like a practical decision, but before the next sunrise, something happened inside that tent. Something so terrifying that 9 experienced hikers abandoned their only shelter against the brutal Siberian winter. The night of February 1st, 1959, began like any other night during the expedition. 9 experienced hikers had reached the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl and placed their tent on the open mountainside. Inside that small shelter were everything they needed to survive the harsh winter: sleeping bags, warm clothing, food, and essential equipment. For a group of skilled mountaineers, this was not unusual, but sometime during that freezing night, something happened. Something so unexpected and terrifying that these experienced hikers abandoned their only protection against the deadly cold, and they never came back. The biggest mystery surrounding the Dyatlov Pass incident is that there were no survivors to tell investigators what happened. No eyewitnesses, no final message, no clear explanation, only a frozen campsite and a trail of unanswered questions. When the group failed to return according to their planned schedule, their families immediately became worried. The expedition was expected to end in early February. However, in the Soviet Union during the 1950s, delays were not uncommon for remote mountain journeys. Poor weather, difficult terrain, and limited communication could easily slow down an expedition. At first, there was still hope that the hikers were simply delayed. But as the days passed without any news, concern began to grow. A large-scale search operation was eventually launched. Fellow students, experienced hikers, military personnel, and local rescuers entered the dangerous wilderness of the northern Ural Mountains. They followed the route planned by the group, searching through deep snow and freezing conditions. Then, on February 26, 1959, rescuers made a discovery that would turn a missing person case into one of the most famous mysteries in history. They found the group's tent, but the scene was unlike anything they expected. The tent was still standing on the mountainside, but it had been damaged. Investigators discovered that it had been cut open from the inside. Inside the tent were the hikers' personal belongings, food supplies, and important winter equipment. Their warm clothes and boots were still there. For people facing extreme cold, leaving behind these essential items seemed almost impossible. Why would 9 experienced hikers leave their shelter without proper protection? What could have forced them to escape into the freezing night? Outside the tent, searchers found a line of footprints leading away from the campsite toward the nearby forest. The footprints suggested that the group had moved away from the tent together. But another detail made the discovery even more disturbing. Some of the hikers appeared to have left without wearing proper winter footwear. In temperatures far below freezing, walking into the darkness without adequate protection would have been extremely dangerous. Approximately 1.5 kilometers away from the tent, near the edge of the forest, rescuers found the first 2 bodies. The hikers appeared to have attempted to survive the night by creating a small fire beneath a cedar tree. The discovery suggested that, after leaving the tent, they had tried to find shelter and stay alive. But the other 7 hikers were still missing. The search continued deeper into the frozen landscape, and when investigators finally discovered the remaining bodies, the mystery only became more complicated. The evidence found on that mountain would create decades of debate among researchers, scientists, and historians. Because the question remained unanswered, what could make 9 experienced hikers leave their tent in the middle of a freezing night? The discovery of the remaining hikers would make the mystery even more confusing. After finding the first 2 bodies near the cedar tree, search teams continued looking through the snowy forest and surrounding slopes. For nearly 2 months, the harsh winter conditions made the search extremely difficult. Then, in May 1959, when the snow began to melt, rescuers made another disturbing discovery. Deep inside a forested area, under several feet of snow, they found the bodies of the remaining 4 hikers. With all 9 members of the group finally located, investigators began examining the evidence. The official investigation, launched by Soviet authorities, focused on one major question: what forced these experienced hikers to abandon their tent in the middle of the night? The circumstances were unusual. The tent had been cut open from the inside. The hikers had left behind their equipment and warm clothing. Their footprints showed that they moved away from the campsite, but there was no clear evidence of another person following them. The location of the bodies also created more questions. Some of the hikers had suffered serious injuries, including severe fractures. However, investigators reported that the injuries did not appear to have been caused by a direct attack. One of the most mysterious details was that some bodies were found with unusual conditions, including missing soft tissue caused by natural decomposition after being exposed to the environment. These findings later became the source of many theories and speculation. During the investigation, Soviet authorities also examined whether another person or group could have been responsible. However, investigators found no convincing evidence of an attack by outsiders. There were no clear signs of a struggle at the campsite. No unknown footprints were discovered, and the surrounding area did not provide evidence that another group had been involved. In the final official report released in 1959, Soviet investigators concluded that the hikers had died because of an unknown natural force. The exact wording of the conclusion remained vague, which only increased public curiosity. For many people, the explanation did not feel complete. How could 9 experienced hikers, who understood the dangers of winter survival, suddenly leave their shelter without proper clothing? What could have been powerful enough to make them believe escaping into the freezing darkness was safer than staying inside their tent? Over the following decades, the Dyatlov Pass Incident became surrounded by countless theories. Some suggested that a powerful avalanche forced the hikers to flee. Others believed unusual mountain winds, military activity, or secret experiments could have played a role. There were even more mysterious claims involving unexplained lights in the sky and other strange possibilities. However, many of these ideas lacked strong evidence. The challenge for investigators has always been separating facts from speculation. The facts are clear. 9 hikers entered the northern Ural Mountains in January 1959. They established a campsite on the slope of Kolatsiakol. Their tent was abandoned during the night. Their bodies were later discovered in different locations, but the exact chain of events that led to their deaths remains uncertain. More than 60 years later, researchers continue studying the evidence, searching for a final explanation. And among all the theories, one question still remains at the center of the mystery. What really happened during those final hours on the mountain? For decades, researchers, scientists, and historians have tried to answer the same question. One of the most widely discussed explanations is the avalanche theory. According to this idea, a small avalanche or snow slab may have struck the campsite, creating panic among the hikers. They may have believed the slope was becoming dangerous and decided to leave the tent quickly. Supporters of this theory point to several details. The tent was located on an exposed mountain slope, and the hikers had cut their way out from inside, possibly because they were unable to use the normal entrance. The injuries found on some of the hikers could also be explained by the force of moving snow. However, critics of the avalanche theory argue that there are problems with this explanation. They point out that the tent was not completely buried, and some researchers believe the slope was not steep enough for a deadly avalanche. They also question why the hikers moved so far away from the campsite instead of returning once the danger had passed. Another theory focuses on the powerful winds of the Ural Mountains. Some scientists have suggested that a phenomenon called katabatic wind may have created extreme conditions on the mountainside. These sudden, powerful winds can produce intense pressure, noise, and fear, potentially causing people to make irrational decisions. A related idea involves infrasound, very low-frequency sounds that humans may not consciously hear, but that can affect the body and emotions. However, these explanations remain theories, and there is no direct evidence proving that such conditions caused the tragedy. Another major theory involves possible military activity. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union carried out secret military tests in remote regions, and some people have suggested that the hikers may have accidentally entered an area where unusual activity was taking place. Reports of strange lights in the sky around the region added to these suspicions. But again, there is no confirmed evidence that military testing caused the deaths of the hikers. Over the years, many other theories have appeared, including some involving unknown creatures or unexplained events. These ideas became popular because the mystery contained so many unusual details. However, historians and researchers generally consider these claims to have little supporting evidence. In 2020, Russian officials reopened discussions about the case and supported a natural explanation, suggesting that a snow slab avalanche was the most likely cause. Modern scientific studies have also examined whether a rare type of avalanche could explain the injuries and events surrounding the incident. Yet even today, not everyone agrees. Some researchers believe the available evidence supports a natural disaster. Others argue that important questions remain unanswered. The Dyatlov Pass incident is remembered not because we know exactly what happened, but because we still do not. 9 young explorers entered the frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains with dreams of completing an extraordinary journey. Instead, they became part of a mystery that has survived for generations. Their photographs, journals, and final campsite continue to remind us that even in an age of science and technology, some historical events remain difficult to fully understand. Perhaps one day, new evidence will reveal the complete truth. But until then, the mountain keeps its secret. This was the story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this mysterious case in the comments. Because history is filled with stories that still wait to be understood. Some mysteries are solved by time, others remain trapped in history forever. This was ChronoVerse.